Welcome back to Negronis with Nord. We are testing a new format here. I've been doing this show for the better part of 6 or 7 years. We've done, I think, close to 400 episodes of me giving advice on influencer marketing. And we're pivoting the structure a little bit and bringing in more voices and doing more interviews. We're still going to have the occasional hot take show when I have something I feel really passionately about talking about in the influencer space, but I am excited to kick off a new season, as it were, of this show with Tembe Denton-Hurst, who is an incredible writer, novelist. She writes for The Strategist, and importantly for this show, is a popular and successful Substack writer as well. We have had a huge amount of interest from brands recently in working with Substack creators. We are hearing from more and more creators that they want to be starting Substacks. And so we wanted to dive into what makes this platform tick. What are the implications on the larger media landscape? How might brands work with Substack creators? And is this going to be a consistent part of the creator industry or just a flash in the pan? Tembe goes into all of that and more, as well as giving us some really great book recommendations. So strap in, stick around, and enjoy the episode. How was that? We're going to start with a super basic question. For the people that don't know what is Substack, like, how do you explain, if you have to explain to people what it is, how do you explain what it is?
I do have to explain to people what it is, because when I tell people in my life that I have a newsletter, their response is like, oh, okay, cool. But usually what I say is like, I have a Substack, and they're like, what's that? So I'm like, it's like a newsletter platform. I think it's also becoming its own social media in a way, but it's a hosting platform that's trying to do other things.
Yeah.
It has lots of features.
We find out about you, I think, internally here at 4, we got interested in Substack. We have been pitching to our clients to do more on Substack. I think someone that we interviewed for a newspaper we did internally was like, hey, you have to talk to her. She's kind of working on this piece. What drew you to the platform? Like, maybe give a quick TLDR on your background and how you ended up on Substack.
Yeah, so I've been a writer for a really long time. Also interested in books for a really long time, but I never became like a book reviewer or anything. Like, the books writing thing never overlapped or intersected. I'm a beauty writer by trade. And so I've always wanted somewhere to talk about books in like a long form way. And so often I would just like post it on my Instagram story. I did these little reviews. I would like make it all pretty, but I didn't feel like I was having a deep enough discussion around the work that I was thinking about and talking about. And there was so much more that I wanted to say. And so simultaneously, Substack is becoming a thing. One of my friends, Hunter Harris, we work together at New York Magazine. She has a really popular Substack called Hung Up. She actually left New York Magazine to go work, launch her Substack. And so I was like, holy shit. That was probably the first time that I heard about Substack. And I was like, this seems interesting, cool. It seemed like the kind of thing that very established writers were going off to do the thing. And then after Hunter did it, I would say that was maybe, don't quote me, I don't know when Hung Up was launched. It was during the pandemic. Yeah. In that timing, it was amorphous, like 2020, 2021. I'm so sorry, Hunter, if you see this. Love Hung Up real bad. But yeah, so she launched that, and then I noticed a lot of other people launching Substacks, specifically in my beauty fashion space. And a lot of it I noticed were places for people to kind of stick stuff that they were outside of their regular beats, or they would be writing kind of extensions of their regular beats, but maybe things that wouldn't have landed at a publication. And so, yeah, I decided so Substack reached out and was like, would you ever want to start a platform? I mean, start a newsletter.
So they actually reached out to you.
Yeah, they have writer people. They have writer acquisition, a writer acquisition team.
Okay.
And so if they identify someone who they're like, oh, this is
you got pitched.
Yeah.
Everyone else is sitting around being like, should I start a Substack? They're like, will you start a Substack, please?
Yeah, but I was
great.
But I mean, they were like, it would be nice if you did this, kind of join, not we're going to give you money to do this.
Right.
So it was very much
still nice to be wanted.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I had already been flirting with the idea of starting a Substack. I knew I wanted to do a books one. I started thinking about it probably in 2021, and I was a little hesitant because I was writing this novel, and the novel came out. I was really busy doing all the promotion for all of that stuff. Homebodies is out in paperback July 2nd. But
We'll put a link.
no, but all of that to say, it was just heads down. Like, writing a novel is all consuming. It's a lot. It's hell in some ways and like exciting in others, but it was just too much. I couldn't do everything at once. So once the novel was wrapped and I was like, I have more space in my brain, and I was like, okay, maybe I should do this. And I also started like interviewing / talking to people for this piece that I was writing for the cut, and thinking about how Substack has really become this place for what would have been fashion columnists, and like what would have been the editor-in-chiefs, and what would have been these like fashion directors and big fashion editors. I think that landscape is really evolving, and so it's not what it once was. I think the idea of this celebrity editor turned into the influ editor, which is now turning into the Substack newsletter writer.
Right.
And I think everything has its place, but Substack, I think, is great for writers who like to write. I think as much as fashion journalism is about the journalism, it's also about the aesthetic. It's about the eye. It's about, because a fashion editor could be doing any number of things. That could mean, in this day and age, it could mean a few different things. It could be someone who's actually writing. It could be a market editor whose main job is like styling out photo shoots or collaborating with different people and like orchestrating things for covers and whatnot. So it's like, there's a lot of jobs within the jobs, but I think people who are like, I love fashion, I want to write about fashion, or I like beauty, I want to write about beauty, or whatever thing, Substack's a really great place. It's a real place for writers. And then obviously there's the monetization bit, which is exciting. I started doing research for that piece, and started to recognize like there are some people who are making livings from this. You can charge people whatever you want to charge them. Some people do $5 a month, $6 a month, $7 a month. And when you start to do the math, even after Substack takes their cut, it can be lucrative in the right circumstances. And if you have lots of followers, like if you have 5,000 paying subscribers, that's a massive amount of income. And it eclipses anything you'd be making as an entry-level writer, even a senior writer coming in today into a magazine publication.
Yeah.
Gone are the days when like $80,000, $90,000 in New York meant like you could like buy an apartment. Like that's not really realistic anymore.
No, I mean, buy an apartment, you can barely buy dinner, unfortunately.
Truly. Yeah, no, you still have, it's still looking like roommates and
right.
all of the things. And so I think, Substack as a way to either support or, replace like whatever income you'd be getting, whatever like W-2 situation you're in, is becoming more appealing. Even though I think now that it's becoming more saturated, I'm sure just like, Instagram and all the things. And as the medias and tools go, it gets harder.
Yeah.
The longer you wait to get in. That's a really long-winded way to answer your question.
That's fantastic. And there's two things right from that I know I want to dive into. If this whole world didn't exist, the people that are on Substack maybe would probably be, they'd be writing at magazines, right? They'd be writing in traditional media. I wonder what you think we are losing by having people increasingly go out on their own, make this content, monetize it themselves, outside of these kind of monolith structures of Condé Nast and Hearst, and et cetera. And what are we gaining from it?
I think it's two-pronged. I think on one level, and I think about what is the future of Substack, if everybody was to migrate or people were to leave publications to go start their Substacks, you don't have an editor. That's a big thing. Writing my own newsletter, it's just me and sometimes Grammarly to make sure that the commas are in the right place. It's not, I don't have my editor being like, I understand that you're trying to be funny. You're not that funny. There's no one to be like, reel it in. That's the third metaphor you've used today. You've used obviously 6 times. Like, you've used the same sentence structure over and over. There's no one to like sharpen your pen. You have to hire that out. I think there's also no legal protections. If someone if I'm working at New York Mag and I publish something and they're like, that's incorrect, we want to sue you. New York Magazine has a legal team. Substack, to my knowledge, does not have a legal team for their writers to protect them. I think it's kind of the difference between working for a cab company and driving Uber. Yeah. It's like a reproduction of the gig economy. So there's autonomy there. And I remember in the beginning when Uber used to have billboards everywhere, like, make $80,000 a year driving Uber. Right. Like, this is so great. This is so amazing. And now everybody's in court. Yeah. So, it's...
And we're paying $180 to get to JFK.
Exactly.
Like, how did this happen?
Exactly. So it's interesting to think about the life cycle of a product like this and, what kind of becomes of the things. Substack becoming popular, I think, is in line with the trend cycle. You know, they say every 10 years, you know, blogging was cool in 2013, and now here we are back again, 2024, and people are writing Substacks. I think there's like slightly different interest in it now, because I think before you could kind of blog and be very picture image focused, and that's possible on Substack, but I do think people want to read.
Yeah.
So I think that is kind of like a unique value add. We're losing that, but what we're gaining, I think, is a lot of different voices. One of my favorite Substacks is called The Molehill, by Viv Chen. It's a fashion Substack, and she was a scientist prior to this. And so it's like that opportunity to pivot, to change, to build a portfolio is really there, and like build an audience. And that's not something, that's not as easy at a legacy media publication. You kind of have to come in with clips, and having a successful Substack could, similarly to a blog, of like popular blog, kind of be a portfolio, a resume, an opportunity to say like, here's my writing style, here's how I'm able to do this thing. What I'm interested to see is like how seriously Substack gets taken, like individual Substacks as publications unto themselves. Like, will we ever see, kind of like when streaming first started and they were like, oh, like streams now count for chart singles. It's like, will there ever be a situation where they're like, this Substack publication, this newsletter is eligible for an ASME, this is eligible for a Pulitzer? Like, will we ever get to the point where like digital media, this kind of digital media, this independent media is going to be taken seriously? I'm curious. I don't know if the answer is yes, but I'm compelled to see like how the powers that be, the gates that are being kept, like, will they open for this kind of production or not?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Right?
Most likely not. The answer is no.
Yeah. Usually, I mean, I think we grapple with that even in our business.
Yeah.
And like wanting validation from an industry. Like, I had this realization recently that like we were seeking this validation from an industry that like literally, if we are right about our mission, the result of that is dismantling that industry. And so like, why would they validate us?
Right.
You know, no one's gonna like pat your back as you like stab them, right? And so like, I think it is hard for these things that exist to validate industries are really slow and reluctant to like to let new things in, because like in our world, like a Cannes Lion for advertising, like that still does mean something. Winning that award means something. Obviously winning a Pulitzer means something. They still have that like, and in the same way that like being in the New York Times, while you know, it may not drive as much traffic as if you were in a really popular Substack. Probably wouldn't, honestly. Us having been in the Times a few times, like, I always expect, like, okay, here comes the deluge. And it's like, kind of nothing. But it still does feel like it means something, right?
Yeah.
You still get that, like, hit of,
the
like,
rush.
oh, shit, yeah, I've got a byline in Vogue or New York Mag or whatever it is. Another question I had, you were talking about monetization. And I think for so many creators, the dream is predictable revenue that comes in every month, subscriptions. Like, it's such an idealized way to make money as a creative that, like, if I can just get 5,000 people to pay $5 a month, I'm making $200,000 or $300,000 a year.
Right.
Like, dream.
Well,
It is hard to get people to pay for things that they're used to getting for free.
Absolutely.
And there's so much content for free. So I wonder if you could talk about your experience in, how do you build not just a successful Substack in subscribers, but like paying subscribers?
To your point, I think a lot of creators low-key want a job. But they don't want, you know what I mean? Like predictable income, they want to be W-2 employees. But don't want to do W-2 behaviors. And I hear that.
Yeah.
Relatable content. And so I think you have to just embrace the unpredictability, but you also have to be like willing to write things and write often and like be really engaged and also constantly coming up with new things and interesting things and being in a part of the market that is untapped and unexplored. Because why are people paying for things that, like you said, they can get for free unless they're really committed to you as a brand or an identity or an entity? They're like really wanting to support you and they really believe in you as a creator. I mean, for me, I'm like, write good stuff and people will gravitate toward it. But to write good stuff, it costs money on the back end. Like whether that's you having gone to an MFA program or doing whatever you've done, like
Or just
working at
time, right?
time, yeah, like, or constantly coming up with new ideas and new concepts. I think one thing I do really like about Substack is that there's a lot of really like niche Substacks. Like there's a packaging Substack that I really, really like. There's a few Substacks that are just simply about taste. And I think attracting a paying subscriber, you have to be offering something that they essentially can't get anywhere else, whether that's your vintage Etsy search terms that, you're gatekeeping. People were like, great, yes, I want to know how to find this thing that looks like the robe, but was made in 19...
This is a real thing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Like, made in 1994 from, like, pure cotton.
Yeah.
Or, like, yes, like, where do I find these, like, vintage Gap jeans? Like, these are things that people want to pay for because it's, like, simplifying... kind of cutting up, like helping somebody get to their final result without them having to do the legwork is, it's like that's the kind of niche thing that girls who are really into fashion and really into secondhand and like vintage and things like that. Like these are things that you're not going to get from Vogue because Vogue doesn't make money from not like you can't make affiliate revenue off of a single item that someone is selling from their garage. Yeah. So they don't really promote that type of thing. Like the best you'll probably get is like 20 vintage sellers you should probably follow on Instagram or something like that. Or they'll interview like a vintage shop that is already doing that back end work. But then like a fashion Substack person might be writing about vintage and like in this way of helping you do the work yourself. It's almost like you're paying someone to like kind of do the job for you. So I think there's the service journalism element of Substack. There's that piece of it. Then I think there's also the world of, you're writing fiction maybe, or you're producing a thing that people want to know more about. And then they're like, we're going to pay for that. Or maybe it's your commentary. Like Hunters is, people are paying for her to say hilarious things about Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck. So people are like, I'm sat for that. They want to be part of the subscriber chat. Like if Hunter is watching the Oscars, they want to watch the Oscars with Hunter. And I think she has a really great balance of one, being a talented writer, but then also cultivating this community around it that people are like, I don't want to miss out. Like I pay for Hunter's newsletter because I'm like, I want to know what they're talking about. This is hilarious. This is funny. So I do think it's a lot about perspective, and you have to know your perspective. Like in a world where on TikTok you can, everyone's promoting the same TikTok shop product, and if you get in early enough, you too can sell 10,000 Tower fans on Amazon. That doesn't work on Substack because I think that the like lack of originality, lack of ideas does not get you any, like you don't win in that way. At the same time, I don't think Substack is a meritocracy. I think that good content is great, but similarly to book publishing, the best stuff isn't always going to rise to the top. Like sometimes the best stuff is niche and it stays niche. Yeah. I think people who find a lot of success either have connections, have a unique perspective, and ideally they have both. So I think it's a good place for someone who has an established platform and is like willing to write stuff consistently, has interesting things to say, has like interesting knowledge to share, and like maybe doesn't want to put together like a scary course with Canva graphics.
Right. You talk about it being a meritocracy, and I was really interested about growth, and if you, I've seen in like the world I kind of like dwell in of like, entrepreneurs, investors, people talking about like money, finance, whatever. A lot of people that launched Substacks, they already had huge Twitter followings. They were like established, and you were getting like, oh, okay, I'm going to get like this. They generally don't take the time to write this stuff down. I'm paying because I feel like I'm getting, this knowledge I wouldn't get otherwise, which you were saying, but like they weren't growing on Substack. Is it possible, and a lot of creators listen to this podcast, watch this show on YouTube, and a lot of people have been, I think, hearing like, you should start Substack, you should start, right? Is it a place where you can grow, or is it a place that's best to cultivate, to kind of like push your following into something you can own and monetize more easily?
I think the answer is both. Like, I think it's two things, because Substack does have like, they've now created this sort of social media in the form of notes. And so notes, you can discover other people's things. If someone likes it, if you follow that person on Substack or you're friends with that person on Substack, it then you will then see it, like it's almost like a repost situation. You can also be recommended on some Substack. So if I recommend I recommend like 6 publications, for example. And so I generate subscribers based on that for other people's publications. I'm recommended by I think like 50 publications. And I think last time I checked, I think I got like 2,000 subscribers from all of those recommendations.
Right. It's bringing
together.
back like the old blog role.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right? And so I think building community on Substack is a really great way to grow, and you have to be authentic and like really interacting. I think there's 2 ways to do it. Either you see it as, here is my list, I'm bringing them in, I'm doing a lot of external work, I'm promoting it on TikTok. People are promoting their Substacks on, like, they kind of create video formats, video versions of whatever they're doing on Substack, and will say, you know, like, here's a truncated version of this essay that I wrote on Substack. Like, you want to read the rest, go to my Substack. And so that's one way to grow. Or they're using, it's kind of a lot of like cross promotion situations. So I think there's like 2 paths. Like, either you're bringing your own, you're like seeing the community outside and you're like, let's bring you into Substack. Please subscribe to my newsletter. Or if you want to grow on the platform, I think they make it fairly easy for you to be findable. And as you grow, and, you know, they do definitely prioritize monetized creators. I would say like having paid on.
Right. Which makes sense for them.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like as you grow, hopefully you'll like make a leaderboard or something. And then if someone's like, who are the top writers in technology? You know, you'll see you'll be on that board and people can kind of find you that way. Additionally, I think it's easier to break into certain things that haven't already been written about a ton. Like, certain areas of Substack, I think, are more saturated than others. And so, I mean, fashion Substacks 3 years ago, there were like 4, and now there's a bunch.
Right.
And so it's not to say that it's saturated. Like, I still think that anyone with a good idea can do literally anything. Like, people keep launching brands in the beauty space. Rihanna is launching Fenty hair.
Right. It's saturated if you're like mediocre.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think that there's always room in any market for a unique, fresh, new point of view. But like, it gets increasingly difficult if you're just okay.
Yes.
To compete, you know,
For
because
sure.
it's just like, gets more competitive. And we've seen that on social, you know, I mean, look at, TikTok, Instagram, all of those platforms. Like, if you were there early, it's pretty easy to grow a following. Like, there just wasn't a lot of people on there, you know, and now all of a sudden everyone's on there and you're competing, you know, you're competing with people who are very, very good at what you do.
Right.
And it gets a little bit harder. You talked about building community and growth. You know, if you're doing this thing on your own, you don't have the, you know, the kind of lattice of support of a bigger organization. I wonder how much you think it changes what people write over time.
Yeah.
Because like, I've seen this on TikTok especially, where like somebody will be doing their thing and then they have something that goes viral and then they just start doing that thing over and over, right? And then they lose, I think, what like made the account interesting in the first place. Right? It becomes not an expression of what they are interested in, but like a chase for that like next hit of like, oh, this is what people want. I just need to like give them this.
Yeah.
Do you see that? Do you see like, as Substack becomes more popular, do you see it becoming a less quirky, intellectual, you know, more kind of like consensus place? Or do you think it's like maintaining some of its, I guess for the individual creator, do you think it's like hard to maintain your unique point of view if you're trying to constantly build and service this audience? And then like, as a platform, how do you think it reacts to getting more popular?
I think because the algorithms, at least for now, function differently, I think there isn't, so you don't really get rewarded for writing, like, I don't think for creating viral things. Like, I think, of course, you could have like a viral essay and you're like, oh, okay, like this essay went well, maybe I should write more essays. I think more format types, like, oh, this interview style went really well, I'll do more interviews like this. But I think it's less like, oh, now I should do daily vlogs and like I should only do Get Ready With Me's and not doing I don't know if
that makes sense.
What I'm saying makes sense, but it's really, I think people who are coming to Substack kind of have an idea, or at least the people who are successful on it and the writers that I follow have an idea, they know who they are, and so they're like, some of my essays are going to do really well, some of my essays may not do really well. Like, I think I'm seeing less format differentiation as much as just like different topics. And that's what I've noticed the most. So yeah, like people who are writing essays, the essay goes viral, they've pretty much, that like essays are kind of their bread and butter. And so it's like, this one really hit. Some people have different content buckets, but I think very few are running their Substacks like a magazine.
Yeah.
Where they're like, oh, like really, people really love this franchise. We should just keep doing this franchise all of the time. Like on my newsletter, which is like the books newsletter, I have one franchise that I do all the time, but I only do it once a month. Even though I know people really like it,
Yeah.
I don't really want to do it a bunch.
Yeah. It's the great part of, doing what you want, right?
Yeah.
Let's see, I follow, how many people I follow on Instagram. It's not like a crazy amount, but 1,265 people. I obviously can't subscribe to 1,200 newsletters.
Right.
And that is a differentiator for the platform as well. Like you were saying, like people come here to read. I wonder, do you have a sense as someone who's in the community, you probably also follow a lot more Substacks than the normal person, I would imagine, of like, how many can you follow? Is it hard to keep them engaged? I assume you're seeing stats on readership and open rates and things like that. Do you find like, keeping that community engaged is difficult? And like, yeah, how many of these accounts do you think the average person like will follow? Like if this is going to be 100 times bigger than it is today, and people are going to be winning Pulitzers for their Substacks, which is like, totally feasible and possible. For the average person, how many of these do you think they'll follow? Because it is quite a different form factor.
I don't know how many other people follow. I know people say like, oh, I follow way too many newsletters, but I don't know what too many means. Me personally, I think I'm subscribed to 56.
Okay.
I don't read all of those at all. As it gets bigger, people are going to have to get choosier, and I think people are seeing that effect now, especially with paid. Like people are like, okay, I can pay. It's kind of like streaming. They're like, okay, I have Hulu, I have Netflix, I have Apple, I have Discovery Plus. People are like, can Substack bundle and like make it pay one price and free to subscribe? And it's like that becomes no.
Yeah.
That's like no.
Yeah.
I mean, they could, maybe they will, but I don't know that benefits creators ultimately to be in like a tip pool. And it's like, so if all creators get together and then then it's a magazine.
Yeah.
So it's like, it becomes like its own little like, I'm like, oh, okay. So now it's like the Village Voice or something. Like, it's like, I don't know. Like, it's like it becomes the very thing it's not supposed to be.
Right.
So I think the conversation around like who's going to rise to the top is going to come down to who's going to continue to like innovate and make interesting content and like more interesting content, and also just I think looking at Substack and thinking, oh, I'm going to be rich from this is a bad thing to think. I don't think that that's like the way people should think about it. I don't think people should be looking at it as like, here's an opportunity for me to, you can focus on your Substack and make income, and that's real. And there's a lot of people who are doing that, and people who are doing Substack full time and have quit jobs to focus on it exclusively. But those are people who I think are like, I want to be engaged with my community. They know their community is really engaged. I think if you're going to wake up one day and say, oh yeah, like I think this Substack thing could really work out for me, wrong thing.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Because like I say the same thing about writing. I'm like, if you want to be rich, don't say, oh, I'm going to write a novel.
Right.
That is a silly thing. Yeah. Just because the percentages of people who are making money full time from writing is very low.
Yes.
And it's not to say that it's impossible, but it's just not even just not likely. It just is. I don't know. I think it changes not only the quality of the content, but it's like the intention of it. Because when you're thinking about it, like, oh, I need to make money from this thing, and it's not just like a natural, or not even natural, because people do work hard. Like it's intentional and people can be strategic. But if I'm only in this for the money, there's so many other things you can do to make money.
Yeah.
So many like easier things,
right.
Like getting a job. like
Go do, what did you say?
W2 work.
Yeah. Well, W2, you were like, people don't want to do W2 effort or something.
Yeah, no, W2 tasks.
W2 tasks.
They don't want a manager. And I'm like,
love that.
Get a manager. Because it's not easy. Like, my Substack, go ahead.
How many people, like, I love that you say that, we're seeing this across the creator space as money becomes a bigger factor in the space, it becomes a bigger motivator, like, people are making real money doing this, and it is, I think writing is different, but if we look at social generally, people are like, wait, I know I make videos, I take photos, like, why not me? Right. I wear clothes, I think I have good style, like, why not me? This person is living this life I want. It seems like, the difference between the life I have and the life I want is a couple 100,000 followers. And like, I'm going to try and do that. Right. And it never really works out if you go about it that way. But I do feel like for writers who, over the last decade and a half have seen their livelihoods,
Right.
just like slipping away a little bit. We're not in the, what did I just see? Like inflation adjusted, like Hemingway was getting like $8 a word as a war correspondent.
Oh, yeah.
Like those days are
Fantasy.
Yeah, those days are gone.
Yeah.
But I do feel like Substack felt like a big push in the beginning was, it felt like a lot of writers were like, this is my like parachute. I'm going to like pull the ripcord and this is going to like support me. And
Yeah.
this is the path. Like you've got a lot going on. It's working for you in some capacity.
Yeah.
Have you seen a lot of people like burn out on it? Like how many of the people that like in 21, when it feels like,
Yeah.
everyone was getting excited about this, I'm sure you had a lot of people start it. Like, have you noticed people like who went all in that it's like, it's not working?
Yeah.
It's,
But I think that's why I have the perspective of like, if you're in this to get rich, it's not going to work out for you because it's not quick, And I think people who can pull the parachute and say this is going to support me are people who already have been publishing their work in one format or another. A lot of people who write novels are using their Substacks as places to either share their work, share behind the scenes process, talk about craft, talk about books that they're reading, talk about things like that, like supplementing something that you're already doing and having a community of people who are like, I know it's hard to be a writer. I want to support you. There are a lot of people who genuinely, earnestly want to support creators in a way that feels like people who have Patreons, for example. They're
Right.
like, I want to support your Patreon book club because I really like the things that you're doing. And like, maybe you're putting out all this free content and I want to have more access to you, or I want to have more access to this other piece, or I want to be part of this like rarefied group. I think you have to like already be loving the thing that you do. And I'm not saying creating tons of free content. Some people's stuff is just completely paywalled, but you can't really start out that way
Yeah.
because people don't know you.
Right.
I think it is really about the relationship and people saying, oh, I want to give to this thing. I want to see it exist in more of a format.
Yeah.
Like I have paid subscribers and I only have one thing that I paywall, which is like my book dates.
Yeah.
And because I was just like, okay, this is like the one thing. And I was like, I'll probably paywall some stuff in the future, but I write it because I like it.
Yeah.
And I write it because I write because I want to talk about books, or I want to write about all the books that I'm reading. And it takes so much time out of my life,
Right.
but it's just something that I like. But yeah, I think it's similar with a creator. Like, 200,000 followers does not a rich person make.
Yeah.
And there's some creators at that level who I'm sure are making the money probably isn't consistent across the board.
Right.
And so there are people who have really a lot smaller followings than mine that are more engaged on Substack. They have people who have much bigger followings than mine that are like maybe not as engaged from maybe a metrics perspective, and people who have 2,000 people on their list and half of those people are paying, and people who have 80,000 people on their list and like the conversion there is like less than 1%.
Yeah.
So it just really varies. And I think that, the goal has to be about making good work, not about like, how am I going to get rich from this thing?
Right.
Because it just,
Not gonna happen.
there's other ways to do it.
Yes.
It's not
Yeah.
impossible, but I think it's possible. It's
Finance. Go for it.
Yeah.
Go work in iBanking.
like, literally that.
You have been. I'm interested in your personal experience. You've been
Yeah.
successful in so many ways. You've got a book out. It's very hard to do. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Writing for established, incredible publications. Now you've got this thing you're doing on your own. For you, the opportunities it's opened, the impact on your life. Is there how do you stack those three up? Being writing for New York Mag, being a novelist, doing this thing on the Substack, and building an audience there.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the different ways those things have impacted your life, your career?
Yeah. They stack kind of. One thing that Michelle Obama said that always sticks with me was that you can have it all, but you can't have it all at the same time. And so I never even if I had these dreams of having a book blog, which that's essentially what the Substack is. And I had a version of a book blog 10, 12 years ago on WordPress when everybody had WordPresses, and it never went anywhere. Slight detour to address what you said earlier, do people burn out? The answer is absolutely. Because the one thing writers hate to do more than anything else in the world is actually write.
Yeah.
And so because that's the case, to consistently put out content, because Substack is also about consistency.
Yeah.
So to write especially if you were like a creator who has, you have a crazy TikTok, like you're doing tons of TikTok stuff, and then you also have Instagram, you're cutting the videos, you're removing watermarks, you're doing all this stuff, and then you're also like, I don't know what else are creators on?
I don't even know.
They Instagram,
they're traveling.
X is not a thing anymore. Twitter X.
I mean, sometimes just the makeup takes hours.
That's what I'm saying. Like, there's so much that they have to do, and it's like, okay, so then you also have to get consistent with this newsletter, and it's not the kind of newsletter where it's like, hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. All right, they can do YouTube. Like, oh hey everybody, like please go watch my latest video. Like, it's not that kind of thing. It's not like the same kind of sales funnel vibe. Yeah. Like, it's not just like. You have to be consistent in offering like different interesting content. There's one creator who does that I think really well, and her name's Heather, and she has a TikTok called Pig Mommy, and so she has Pigpen, and like that's her fashion Substack, and it's really good, and I love her work. I just think she's really funny and smart, and like just does the influencer world stuff in a way that I find to be like compelling. She definitely has this like, I'm your stylish friend vibe that lives in New York that I think like really works well for her.
That's great.
But everything is a different entity.
Yep.
And she talked about like how she thinks about her different content buckets really well. I will get back to what you said. I'll get back to stacking. But she talked about it in a way that I thought was like really interesting. Like how her TikTok she's kind of presenting these theories about styling that she's come up with. And so if you were to go through and watch every single video that she's ever done, you could probably piece together that theory. But then her Substack is a place where she like makes that really plain and makes it very legible for everybody to interact with. And people can pay for that information, or they can book styling things with her. It's about like levels of personalization, levels of access, levels of ease of information. And so I think when you think about it like that, it's no less work, but you're creating like additional value. So I think there's people who are going to find value.
It's like a refinement there too, right?
Absolutely.
It's like TikTok's my like notes app almost.
Exactly.
And then this is my like, I'm actually putting the time to like pull this into a cohesive thought.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that braids really neatly into my thoughts about like how my Substack functions for me. Substack is my notes app. It is my like, it's not quick and off the cuff, but it's like, these are not thoughts that would make it to print. These are thoughts that I'm like, oh, like 50 books that I'm excited to read in the next 3 months. Like, or I'm like writing about, it's like a little bit like a diary. I have this one thing I do called Final File, which is a recap of my month. I do my highlights, my lowlights, the things I like to eat, the things I bought, the things that I want to buy, like the music I listen to. So that's like just like my taste across the board. And so that's fun for me to do. And that's a notes app thing. And I'm like, nobody wants to read this on Instagram story. Nobody cares about this. Instagram is for me to be cute and for me to be hot and for people to respond to me being hot. It's not for the job there is not for me to like, be like, hey guys, like, I don't know. It feels like cringy to me a little bit. So Substack is my place to do that and to talk about what I'm reading and like long form thoughts and things that like just would feel, Instagram is like almost personal for me in a way. It's business, but it's not fully like, I don't use it like that. I'm like, I use it to like show pictures of my little sister and like talk about my book and do whatever. But yeah, so that Substack is like my notes app and kind of where I'm practicing writing like book criticism or like just writing about the things I'm thinking about, or because I'm writing a novel now, it's the kind of place where I'm like, oh, I'll write an idea. I could write a post about all the books I'm reading while I'm writing my novel, or like, here's what I'm thinking about in depth. It's a way for people to kind of look behind the curtain at process for me. And like people who are interested in my writing life or just my life in general and how the way that I'm like narrativizing that and thinking through that. Yeah, that's kind of how Substack functions for me. And then it stacks on top of novel writing, which is very long process. Like, that's not something I can do every week.
Right.
That's something that is kind of like happening in the background when I like waking up in the mornings and writing first thing. Like that's something that's like a writing practice that I have. And Substack is an extension of that writing practice, but like novel writing, like the fruits of that labor, occasional. Yeah. It's not the same kind of, you don't get that like instant gratification of, I thought about this thing, I made this thing real. Like novel writing just takes a lot longer than that. And then working for New York Magazine, I think that just adds cachet across the board. But it also is a place where I've really refined my pen and become a better writer because I have great editors. Being at New York Mag is by far, like, I'm working with a lot of the smartest people that I've ever worked with in journalism. These are people who have won Pulitzers, win ASMEs every year. Like, they're thinking about culture in a really smart way. They're talking about culture in a really smart way. They're thinking about stories in a really interesting way. And so it's become kind of this incubator for me as a writer to continue to interrogate, like, what makes a good story. Like, do we care about white t-shirts? Maybe, right? But what we do care about is, oh, you tried on 25 white t-shirts and you found the best one. It's like thinking about what makes a good story. So it all like touches and braids back into each other. Yeah, but New York Mag, very much my W-2 job where I do W-2 things.
We love. With creative industries fracturing into these more siloed individual pursuits is how much we lose the criticism, mentorship, community, like I remember reading this story years ago about Bob Dylan and how he's a pretty mediocre musician living in Minneapolis. Folk music at the time and country was like a pretty rare thing to be listening to in Minnesota. And so there was this group of 20 or 30 kids that was really into it. And he was middle of the pack, And then he comes to New York and what was his name? Robert Zimmerman, right? Is his actual name. And he comes to New York and he goes to the West Village and he's hanging out in those bars for 6 months. And there was this older man who was like the kind of like, the head of the folk movement in Minnesota. And he said 6 months after Bob Dylan was in New York, he's like, he came back to Minnesota and it was just clear he was a star. He was Bob Dylan. Like he left Robert Zimmerman to go to New York and he came back Bob Dylan and this like different person by like sitting in those West Village bars, playing music, going into that community, getting critiqued, being around people better than him, and kind of plugging into this movement that is like bigger than yourself, and creators are so isolated now. And like you still have that. You have that with your book writing, you'll have an editor, you've got that with your W-2, but like, what do you think for this next generation of writers, if they're going to start on Substack and they're going to find some success early, like how important is that? Is there a way to substitute it? What do you think happens if we lose those kind of communities that help like forge artists?
No, I think that it's essential. I mean, capitalism is the death of art. I think we talk about that a lot as far as like quality of art goes down when people are worried about trying to survive. And like, part of the environment that supported Bob Dylan is being able to live in a loft in Soho for dirt cheap and being able to, go to a bar and drink shitty beer and do all of these things that you didn't have to make money to also be able to be an artist. In the same way, like you had to make a little bit of money, but not in like, it's not a situation where $80,000 is not getting you very far in the city. So I think that the circumstances have evolved and it's more complicated now to be able to focus on art in that way. I think going to some kind of being in community with other writers, workshops, things like that, that's super important. 'Cause you need that. I mean, you can't, like, nothing is created in a silo. I think not only do you have to live life, but you also have to interact with other people's work and allow people to interact with your work. Because, like, for me, I've become like, my writing talents have increased exponentially since working at New York Magazine. I think, and that was because I was around a lot of, like, smart people. And so I think putting yourself in circumstances that you can become better at your chosen craft is essential.
And there's that pressure.
Yes.
Right? I mean, New York Mag, especially recently, has just been, like, fucking crushing, I feel like. And like every piece, like essay, article that has had like real cultural impact in the last year has come out of there. It does feel like something special is happening there that like, other legacy publications have lost.
Yeah.
I do think that like, I worry that creators are substituting community for that group of people that can really push you and be like, hey, you're using too many metaphors, that joke's not funny,
right?
Like, and does it all just kind of like devolve into something like less interesting if people don't have those, that's like one of those things that those institutions, which, in some ways have underpaid and have created the situation we're in for artists. They still do have that like thing that they can give people, and you still go in to write that piece and you're like, okay, I have to be at this level, right? Because this isn't just, it's not my community that loves me and they will like give me this, they'll let me slide if this isn't good enough, right? I don't know if I even know what I am trying to ask as much as like, if they don't have the New York mags to
Yeah.
get like forged in,
Yeah.
is there something that these social networks, these communities can do to help that? Or
I think that like you have to lean into being rigorous in your art and in your craft. Like I think that it's not enough to produce. You also have to be constantly interrogating the things that you're producing and like willing to seek out spaces where those things are happening critically and like going into environments where that's happening. I mean, it's you like New York Mag isn't the only place to become a great writer.
course.
I mean, it's one of the best, but I think that, you know, if you talk to some of the people who are writing like these long form features and you ask them like the places that they were forged, it's not just like that single place. Like it's going to be like the writing workshops, or it's going to be that other magazine, it's going to be that one editor. Like sometimes it is that magical, you meet that one person who really does transform your work or like has you thinking about things differently. But then there's going to be people who are like, I was self-taught, I learned from a book, or I read a ton, or, you know, I think it is really about trying to find ways to be rigorous and really practice. And I think that's what we've, because of that instant gratification culture, or like everyone being on a deadline, or like here are the deliverables, there the space to like really just sit with the work and like do better at it, or do work harder at it, or improve. I think sometimes that's lost in for the sake of creating a product. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's brilliant people everywhere. And so as much as the institutions breed talent, there's a lot of talent that gets kept out, and like talent that was historically kept out, talent that is kept out for various reasons, is whether it's socioeconomic. I mean, they talk a lot about, you know, the Devil Wears Prada in a lot of ways is like as much about the glamorous life that Andy falls into as it is about like the unsustainability of fashion journalism, and how like if you are an outsider, you don't look the part, you don't have the money, it becomes like untenable. But that doesn't make people any less talented. Like you can go down to Flatbush and be like, okay, this person is like has an eye for fashion that rivals the whatever you're seeing downtown. So it's like, it's not that talent is like, I don't know, like that talent does have to be transformed and like molded, but I don't think that that molding has to happen in a specific place. But I do think it requires a certain level of grit and commitment to becoming better. I read this great quote that was talking about how like in the beginning, the things that you're making are bad. Like all you have in the beginning is your taste. And then there's a gap between the thing that you can do and the thing that you'd like to be doing. And you have to keep working until you can close the gap.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that has to be like a North Star, because I would never want to discourage somebody by saying like, oh, like unless you can work at this place, or you can get into this ivory tower, or you can do this thing, that like you won't be successful or you won't be good at it. But more so like you have to just be committed to seeking that continuing to move forward in your work, and not kind of resting on even the instant gratification, the gratification and validation of the outside sources, because, you know, some people don't really know that what they're looking at is mediocre.
Right.
Because
most people don't.
it's like we, you know, people who are really experts in the field know that it's mediocre, but no one knows. They're like, oh, I mean, that looks cool, like that's a great photo, or that's like a great caption, or that's a great story, or that's whatever, and you're like, it's not that great, but nobody knows that. And then the thousands of comments that flood in, like, oh my god, I love this, like lull people into resting on their laurels in a way that I think is like unproductive and does dilute like the whole overall thing. Because I think if we look at everything from a clicks and likes and shares perspective, sometimes things that resonate are not because they're like technically sound or profound in any way. It's just like maybe it's relatable, or maybe it was like randomly funny, or maybe it was real, maybe it was raw, maybe it was salacious, maybe it was a lot of drama. Like there's so many reasons why I think things are successful or start conversations. Maybe it hits a raw nerve, maybe it just is timed well. I think a good editor will teach you kind of how to do both things, like or like a good, you know, you learn how to do, because it is about timing sometimes, but like being able to do both or have a good sense for that is a level of mastery. But I think we should all be aspiring to mastery more than anything else.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a good point. It's what's so hard as a creative is, and maybe it's a taste thing, that like, it's the creator knowing it's mediocre, right? That like that gap between your taste level and your abilities, understanding that gap exists is so important to the like continuance of art. But like, I think what I worry about is all the positive reinforcement you're getting. You get on social, is like you start to maybe believe you're good enough already. You don't need to get better. And hopefully maybe creative people will always have that like thing. Well, they'll know, that they pick up a book, and I was just talking to someone here for I'm reading The Idiot, and she was like, "Oh my God, I love the book," and I was like, "Yeah, it's like." She writes in that way that makes you like never want to write again, because you're like, wow, like I feel like I can pull a paragraph together, but then you read some things sometimes and you're like, wow, I should
let that go.
I should, I am not very good.
No, I mean, writing a novel, there were absolutely many moments where I was texting my best friend, like, I think I should switch to private writing.
Yeah.
Journaling, mayhaps. I said I should abandon, and I realized, but like sometimes, honestly, like it takes you reading bad things to encourage you to do things. Because I didn't decide to write my novel because I was reading Morrison, because that was actually discouraging me.
Yes.
Reading James Baldwin was making me feel like,
you can't read Baldwin when
I
you're
should
writing.
go quietly into that good night. I shouldn't
absolutely.
keep trying to like attempt at this.
No.
There's not really, you're like reading Austen. You're like, oh, okay, like I should just let it go. I should really just
right. Pick up the Danielle Steele.
Right? It was another book that was extremely popular, and I was like, this is so bad. I could totally do this, and then I did it. And so like, because I was just like, there's certain things like I recently read Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, and I was like, yeah, I'll never write again. Thank you, Kaveh.
Right.
It was really good.
Yeah.
5 stars.
Yeah. My last question on this line of thinking is, do you think there will be, and maybe there already is, like, do you think that, let's say 10 years from now, there's like a not zero chance that New York Mag, Vogue, they won't exist anymore.
Right.
Like attention economy, nobody, less people are paying attention. There's a non-zero chance that those publications just will cease to exist. All the talent is starting Substacks. They're on TikTok. They're other places. Yeah. So we lose that infrastructure. Do huge, again, in a world where people are winning Pulitzers for their Substacks, are there editors now? Are people like, ooh, I have a popular Substack, and now in the same way that like, TikTok girlies really want an agent, and it's like it used to be, I feel like this thing that was so validating that like I have a manager, I have made it, that like Substack writers will start paying, like great editors will leave to be like, I'm editing these 10 Substack writers.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a few people already have an editor that they're paying freelance. I think that as long as magazines are unsustainable products, and not in like a ink costs a lot of money kind of way, but in a, we are prioritizing like whatever, like things have shifted, right? I'm not going to pretend to know all of the things, the inner workings of the P&L sheet of a magazine. But as long as like, shout out to the New York Mag Union, shout out to unions all over the country. Like, as long as we are really still fighting for a livable wage and like making money that's below inflation, and like fact checkers are not making money, copy editors are not making money. These are also essential processes inside of the magazine that have to be prioritized. Because I think like as long as those things are being degraded, or like those things are falling by the wayside, the entire product suffers. So I think as much as it looks like, oh, these are the paragons of success, these are the people doing it well, I think even within those institutions, there's conversations around equity, there's conversations around like making sure that everybody who makes this thing happen is happy. And I think that's what brings it long into the future. I think the sustainability piece is a lot of that has to do with supporting your workers and supporting your talent. Because if the talent is happy, the talent doesn't leave.
Yeah.
Like, if the W-2 is paying the bills, why am I cobbling together 16 different things? I mean, I would probably still write a Substack, and I do write a Substack in spite of having a job, in spite of writing a novel. Like, I'm not doing it to make up lost income. I mean, that'd be lit.
Right.
Subscribe to my Substack. But that's like not my end goal. Like, I think that people still would be making these like beautiful side projects, and I think more beautiful side projects because of there being equity in their jobs. They'd be free to think about things instead of trying to do kind of stuff for survival. But I do think that editors, I think that's the next phase. Like, I mean, even for my Substack, I love like aesthetics, and people are always like, Substack is ugly, and it's a little ugly, but it's not bad. Because people are like, I want to customize the fonts more. Right. I want to do more with the colors and stuff. And I'm like, it works for me. I mean, it's basically
it's
nice.
A little ugly, but
but
fine.
like
it's
whatever.
Utilitarian.
It's utilitarian.
Easy to read.
Exactly, and that's how I
easy
like
to publish.
it.
Yeah.
I personally like it. I'm like, I don't have an issue with the interface at all. Because if I hated the UX, I wouldn't use it.
Right.
Like, that's like
Yeah.
how I am. But that's why I'm an Apple Music girl, because I hate Spotify, the
Oh,
way it
wow.
looks.
That's a whole other podcast.
I mean, the sound quality on on Spotify sounds like a bag of rocks and someone's whispering in your ear. It's bad. But all of that aside, even when I was starting a Substack, I was like, oh my God, like, I love that the New Yorker does cartoons. I wonder if I can, like, when I write big essays, I can, like, commission someone to do artwork for for, like, the header of this. Because I'm like, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
And I think that as much, like, now people have these little publications unto themselves.
Yep.
And so I think as people start to take it more seriously, we'll start to see things become more formal. I don't know if there's going to be full-scale art departments, but I think it wouldn't be unreasonable to think, because I mean, Passerby, for example, is a magazine and it's like hosted on Substack, I think either totally or in some, like
Yep.
majority or in some capacity, and they're totally paid and all of that. So I think we're going to see more of that, like original photography, because people are already doing original photography on Substack. Maybe it's in like Becky Malinsky's 5 Things You Should Buy or whatever. It's like her styling, and she's a great Substack also, but like hers is styling and she takes lots of pictures for that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who are doing original photography. So I think that will just continue and like elevate and escalate and become a bigger product. Just like how on TikTok, I think in the beginning, I really miss early days of TikTok, like pandemic TikTok, where it was just like someone's golden retriever running in the snow and like a child running after it and like diving into a snowbank.
Where did that go? Yeah.
Never to be heard
Where
from
did that
again.
go? Yeah.
Yeah, like just like random things that were like viral because it was just like, this is insane in like real life. And you know, like when Google every once in a while will do like a really cool storytelling ad.
Yes.
It felt like that, but
Yeah.
just all the time. And
Yeah.
it was funny and silly and people were just being themselves. Like you could go on TikTok.
Slightly America's Funniest Home Video,
Exactly.
like super cut.
Exactly. Like nobody's hair was done. Everybody just looked kind of crazy.
Yeah.
People were just vibing, making videos, doing
Now everything's got to be a like fucking philosophy 101 lecture that I
Yeah.
like, don't want to hear, you know?
The production value has gone up so much on
Like
TikTok.
there's a reason I didn't major in the humanities. I don't care. Like, please stop, you know? Anyway, that's a whole other podcast. We talked a lot about the creator side. We talked about how this fits into the media landscape. Brands, you know,
Yeah.
anything that is popular, brands want to get their,
Yes.
get their little paws on. We are in the business of like selling
Yeah.
attention. Often like so much of what our job is connecting brands to like culture. I feel like is like as an organism often wants to like repel brands, like they don't want it, and brands are paying to be like, no, we need to be part of this culture. And so like, do you see our brands coming into this space?
Yeah.
Do you think that there's a place for them? What does it look like for marketers who are listening to this and thinking, I want to try and do something on Substack for my brand?
Yeah, I think that it needs to be, because I mean, Substack is not the first time for newsletters to be popular and hot. Like newsletters were cool. Newsletters started being cool, I think, in like 2017. And like you had,
I mean, I remember the like 2008 one.
yeah,
There was like this really popular one in the city that these women ran, and it got to be like an enormous business. Well, I think it was like a shopping one kind
the
of.
Skim.
The Skim, yeah.
Yeah, they
the
still
Skim.
exist. They
Yeah,
still
that
do
was a
their thing.
huge business.
It's still big. They still do
Yeah.
it. I mean, like they make a lot of money from their ads. Like that's
Yeah.
a thing. And there was a Girls' Night In, which was another send
Yeah.
that like came out through like, you know, and now Alicia does Downtime on Substack. And so it's, you know, there's like some evolutions of that and there's been movements around that. And I think that just similarly, but I think that with Substack, there is this vibe of like, ill, like brand.
Interesting.
I think there's ways to do it in a way that feel interesting. Like if I was going to run an ad on my Substack, for example, and everyone I talked to in interview, because I talked to like 20 something people for this story, like a lot of what they were saying, I was like, what are brand, like, are you guys, what are you doing about monetization? Have brands reached out to you? And a lot of it is like, sometimes the Substack has gotten them like more work on Instagram. Like, okay, we're going to send you this thing. Like, we know that you have this on your Substack.
Yep.
And like, maybe you'll include it in something, but it's less, or like, here's a shopping credit or something like that. Like they want them to interact with the product and like kind of hope that it shows up.
Yep.
Similar to like editors and gifting. I think the more formal, like this newsletter is brought to you by Geico, has not really taken off yet. But I do think that if my plan, right, if a brand reaches out to me and is like, hey, Tembe, we want to, you know, work with you on Extracurricular, I'm like, the only way that I see myself doing that is like, you can make one of my paid posts free. which is like you're like when they're like, oh yeah, this episode of Big Little Lies is brought to you by Geico, and it's like cool, Geico, we don't care, and then we watch the show. You know, it's like it's
and then
unobtrusive.
you wake up one day and you have Geico insurance, and you're like, "What the fuck just happened?"
Exactly. Yeah, it's like one of those like it's like a touch point.
Yeah.
Like when people on YouTube, so I like watch a lot of BookTube, and so like when they're like, yeah, and now a second for our Squarespace, and they're like, Squarespace is just such amazing. I'm like, I don't care. If they're like, this episode is brought to you by Squarespace, I'm like, period, Squarespace, love that for her.
Yeah.
Move on.
Next.
And so I think that it's like
Quick aside, BookTube or BookTok?
BookTube all the way.
Okay.
It's a long form thing. Okay,
Yep.
so my favorite BookTube TikTok person, her name is Lexi. She's like 22 or 23. I'm obsessed with her. She reads things that like I would never read. I don't care anything about the things that she reads, but I literally will
What
sit
is she
there
reading?
like romance novels and like TikTok romances and like unhinged like Kindle Unlimited stories.
Yeah.
She's reading she's reading the gamut. She also reads like some lit fic, but it's like very varied across the board. She reads a lot of like popular commercial fiction stuff that I'm just like not really interested in.
Yeah.
But she will sit there and do a breakdown of a video. I will watch if Lexi releases like a new breakdown of a video, it's 2 hours long. I pop that thing in the shower and I will do my everything shower and listen to her talk. I have a little stand in there and she'll just be like, let me tell you about the unhinged craziness that is this book. And I'm like, thank you, Lexi. Yes. Like she has this one series where it's about like, are these like what will happen with these couples? Like she'll read a TikTok romance and she's like, it's like between happily ever after or absolutely divorced.
Yeah.
And so she's like, what is the fate of the couple? Because they all end in happily ever afters. But she's like, this was like really, this couple's not believable. Definitely divorced. Bad for each other. Never to be heard from again. So it's like the way that she thinks about books, talks about books. I'm obsessed with it.
So what is going on with the like resurgence in romance?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Like-
romance actually never really went anywhere.
Right.
Like it's always been a thing. I think the idea that romance is like the checkout line store with like the man on the cover and the woman on the cover, and they're like, you know, on a seaside cliff, falling over that. Like that's like that was like the idea of it. And then they started doing like animated people on the covers, and that really changed everything. People were like, but I think people just wanted to like, it's an escapism thing.
Yeah.
You know, I think when we talk about romance novels, people want to feel something when they read, and I think, you know, literary fiction tends
Sometimes
to be
that's horny.
Yeah.
That's something you can feel.
People
I mean,
love,
like, you
people
know,
love sex. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sex sells.
Yeah.
But like literary fiction, it's like, well, who was it? Was it Hobbes or whatever? Who's like, life is poor, brutish, and short. Like, whatever that was. Literary fiction has like gone the way of that a little bit. Like they're not writing about like, oh my God, and then they swooned in his great stormy eyes and like whatever. Like romance like offers this escapism element and also talks about, like, just uses love as a framework to talk about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think people love that. And it's also, I think, accessible because a lot of contemporary romance features things that people just know about in their own lives and they see in their own lives. Like, they're like, oh, like, they're doing this thing that I also do.
Right.
They're taking Ubers. They're doing whatever. So,
yeah,
no, it's a huge, huge market.
It's wild. Yeah.
Romance is a huge market. Wait, what were we talking about?
What the hell were we talking about?
Brands.
Yeah.
Brands. So I think that brands are most successful, I think, on the platform if they just want to be unobtrusive. Like, I'm going to support you. We're going to support you in creating your product, which is how brands functioned back in the day in the book. Like, in a magazine book, you're like, okay, swiping through Tiffany, whatever. It's like the goal was not to, like, native advertising, I think, was like, you know, great for the brands, great for publications at a point in a time, you know, e-com teams were built off of that. Like magazines were able to also now have in-house brand agencies as a result. So like that obviously added some diversity to the business model. But at the same time, like people don't want to read a whole article and then find out that like this Hanes t-shirt that you like that they're wearing was actually supplied by the brand. Like this was all a plan all along. People feel I think cheated and duped, and you know what I'm saying? I'm like, we need to do it the old fashioned way. Like in Josie and the Pussycats, when they just like are like playing it to you in your ears and lying to you, like you know, just plastering it everywhere. It's like everyone's wearing a t-shirt. Like we have to go back to the old ways.
It'll be interesting because I mean, I've just, you know, sitting from our seat, brands have so much money that they can just like, a community and a platform can only resist it for so long.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, until like it just so far eclipses what you can even get from your subscribers, right? If they're just like, oh shit, yeah, we'll give you $50,000 to write a newsletter about us. And it's like, okay, yeah, I am going to do that. That sounds great. And do that enough. It'll be interesting to see. And again, we are actively pushing this. We're trying to push brands to do it. And part of that is like, not many people are doing it. It's an interesting, innovative thing to do. We I think especially our younger staff, I feel like the Gen Z kids like really love, like, I don't know what article we were just in, but then like some Substack like linked to the article, and like that was what people were excited about, not like being in.
Was it Emily Sundberg's article?
What was it?
Was it hers?
It was the Wired was mentioned in After Hours.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So it was like
Casey used to be with me at New York Magazine.
Yeah, so we were like
funny.
in a Wired article, which is like, oh cool, Wired, and then a Substack linked it, and like everyone was like, oh my god,
but Casey
I can't believe you're in
left
this.
New York Mag to focus on After Hours.
Yeah, I can't believe we're in After Hours. I'm like, I don't
Casey's
know what this is,
fucking
but
brilliant. Like she was writing about Gen Z stuff for us at Strategist, and then she left, and I was like, she's just been.
We love you, Casey.
I love Casey.
Yeah,
love you, Casey. She's super cool.
Well, I feel like in closing,
yeah,
and I feel like you've left me with like a long list of people to research and look up, but I want to know on Substack, and then maybe more traditionally on TikTok or Instagram, like what is your favorite follow right now?
Substack, I love Jessica Elise. She does a Sunday Journal. She's writing about like the intersection of fashion and like fashion theory. So she's talking about like just old dead white men. Marx, wasn't it Vermeer? Maybe his name is. I can't remember. Something like
painter.
No, not him. The other one. Verse something of the leisure class. There's a I should know that, but it's
go back
really
to the
good.
Leisure class.
She's so smart, and she's just like really, really. She's super intelligent. She also has a great TikTok that's very different. And so her TikTok is like, I also love following her on TikTok, where she'll like do these little things. Her thing is like always not completing her sentences on TikTok. So she'll be talking and then she just stops talking and the video ends and you're like, Jessica. But she's like, she's really, really stylish, very, very cool, very, very witty. Love her stuff. Love Hunter, obviously. Easy. Viv Chen, people who I already said, talked about them. She does the Molehill. I really love that. I really love this one girl, Martha. She has Martha's Reads. She's like a very diverse reading taste. And so she like will do like every month she reads like 10 books in a month and she'll give us like a recap. And I'm always picking things like, oh, this is really interesting.
Nice.
I should read that.
Yeah.
Oh, there's this one Substack called Abitse, and it's about, like, I've interviewed her for the fashion story. She just, like, interviews a bunch of, like, really stylish people, and they talk about where they get their stuff. And I'm like, absolutely. This is exactly the kind of information that I need. I will literally don't miss one. And then Harmony Holiday, she's, like, a Black music theorist and she writes music criticism, and she's one person where every time I read her work, I think I will never write again. She's so talented. Like, and there's very few Substacks that I actually pay for. And Substacks I pay for are Harmony Holidays, and I pay for Jessica's, and I also pay for Hunter's. Yeah. So those are the 3 Substacks that I actually like pay my money for.
Okay.
And I love them. They're just like really, 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 really talented all across the board. I'm trying to think like who else am I like when their Substacks come out, I have to read them. Oh, Allie LaBelle. She does one that's about like taste essentially, and she's a creative with a capital C.
Yeah.
Like, and has like just the best taste in all of the things.
Yeah.
And she's super cool. Those are like some of my bigger
I love it.
my bigger Substack ones. I'm sure I'm forgetting people. On Instagram, who do I love following? I love following Peyton Dix. She's hilarious. Her and Hunter have a podcast together. And yeah, she just be talking shit. She does this thing with her mom where like her mom, she like does Guess the Celebrity with her mom. And it's so funny. And that's one of those things that's like naturally like does really well on social. And like they've done one like sponsored by a brand and it like didn't feel any less
that's great
fun because we were like, period, get the bag.
Yeah.
And I think like those are circumstances where it's like, great, we like want, when your community is excited for you to win, the brand ad, they're like, amazing, yes, we're getting money. Like another person who I think does that well is Skylar Marche. She's like a really popular creator on the app, and she just like has built a real community in real life and like in New York, and people want to see her win online, and she really is creating these very stylized editorial shoots that celebrate Black life. And
Skylar's so great.
She's so great. And I think that what I really love about her is that in real life, she's very supportive of other creators and like other just people, and like is always wants to see everybody win. And I think that radiates, that genuineness radiates, and people want to see her win. They want to see where Skylar's off to next. They want to see Skylar like styling her outfits. They want to know where she gets everything. And it feels very natural. Who else do I like to follow? I follow this one girl, Allegra, and she's like the head of brand at Ash Hotels. And I know her in real life, but she's like very cool. And she's always taking these mirror pics. And I'm like, wow, Allegra's a cool bitch. I'm trying to think. Who else would I follow?
I love, it takes, I feel like to still be relevant, just doing like the mirror picks now,
Oh,
you
yeah,
have
you
to
gotta
be
be
like,
stylish.
you got to be like,
Gotta be
you got to be on a
stylish.
different level.
She's stylish. That's
But it's a real
stylish girl.
flex to be like, I can just do the mirror picks and it can still be like cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone's putting all this effort in. I don't have to put as much effort in.
Yeah.
I'm just living that life.
There's a lot of people I follow who I'm like, I just think that they like radiate that effortless cool, and so I'm like instant follow, screenshotting everything that you are posting. Like, where did you get those shoes?
Yeah.
What are you doing? Like, Naomi, who's the accessories editor at Vogue, she's so stylish. I'm like, her closet is crazy. Always looks great.
Yeah.
Like, I love whatever Naomi's doing. She looks great. I'm like,
Yeah.
you look amazing.
Right.
Love this for you.
What, selfishly, I want to know, just like, obviously you can't answer like favorite book. How do you do that? But like, maybe just a couple highlights that like pop into your head of books that have been like really important.
To me.
Yeah.
The Color Purple by Alice Walker, super important. Just forever an essential situation. I read it way too young. Like, I don't think I understood what The Color Purple was about. I read it when I was like 10 years old, which is crazy to read it. It was just way above my head. And I read it again in college and I was like, oh, okay. Like, it's the great lesbian novel.
Yeah.
She's just really, really talented. Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Are Watching God, very important to me. It was about like wild women and like unruly women. Morrison also talked about wild women, unruly women. These are all writers who I think were interrogating Black femininity and femininity as a whole. And because Black women have been left out of traditional conversations around femininity, what kind of can exist in the spaces as a result. Like, sometimes being excluded allows for the creation of an identity and a self that is not yet seen or like not considered traditional. Like, it's both. I think invisibility can also be a form of protection. And so thinking about that, like all of those ideas like really inform my own writing. Martyr by Kaveh Akbar was like really good. I just loved it. I think just inventive and playful and also really grappling with like really, really big themes. Nicole Dennis Benn, I really love her work across the board. She has this one book called Here Comes the Sun. That's her first novel. And it was like the basis of my thesis when I was in my master's program. And I was just like, blew my mind. It was the first time I like read about queer Jamaican people. And it was just amazing. And on that same note, Shani Mutu, who's like a Indo-Trini Canadian writer and like just is writing about queer Caribbean life as well. And so, yeah, those are some people who I'm like, yes, James Baldwin, always. That's all classics. I'm like, I feel like I have to pick something that was like recent.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
I feel like it's so hard. It's like, I feel like I have to like go through my list
Yeah.
and be like, oh, right, that one.
Yeah.
Like if you just like, it can be hard to even remember what the hell you've read.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh yeah, I love that. That one was really good.
The last book that made me laugh out loud, which is very rare, was this book called Hope by Andrew Ridker. He's so funny.
Yeah.
Just funny.
Laugh out loud books are like so great.
Very rare for me because I don't find like it's very hard to make me laugh when I'm reading, but I was reading that giggling.
Yeah.
Kicking my feet. I was like, oh, this is hilarious. I loved it. It was so good.
That's fantastic. Well, this was I had so much fun.
Same.
And thank you so much for doing this. And everyone should subscribe to your Substack. I'm a new subscriber. I'm excited. But all of you should also pay. Where can people find you? Substack, Instagram. Where can you be found?
Yeah. Substack is tembe.substack.com. Made it really easy. Where can I be found? Instagram is Tembe, Tembae. And then that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Or you can email me, I guess.
Or
or read my work on the Strategist.
Get your New York Mag subscription going.
Yeah, I mean the Strategist is free to read.
Oh,
so yeah, you guys can just read about eye creams for mature skin because I write a lot of skincare stuff, and I'll write the like occasional thing for the cut or something. But yeah, so
Fantastic.
lots of.
You are working on a new book now?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
how far in the hell process are you?
Is my editor watching? Just kidding. No, I'm pretty deep into it.
Good.
I think when I'm writing a novel, the world looks different to me. So every time someone says something funny, I'm like, oh, that was funny. Why was that funny?
Yeah.
Like I'm not like a normal person. Like I'm almost existing like slightly above the ground a little bit, where I'm like everything feels.
You're in like the
something to
flow
analyze.
state kind of, right? Like
Yeah.
I feel like when I used to take a lot more photos, I like you literally start seeing the world
Yes.
through your camera as
Exactly.
like pictures that you could take, you
Yes.
know. It's such a like powerful like state to get
Yeah.
into, you know. You're just a beast, you know. You're just
Yeah.
like getting after it.
You feel like a sponge in a way. So
Yeah.
like when my friends say something funny, I'm like, oh, that was funny. Like what? Like it's just everything feels
Right.
relevant.
Yeah.
Everything. I'm like constantly looking at circumstances and breaking them down and thinking about like what is the character arc here? What is the plot? I'm reading a lot of novels. I'm reading a lot of novels. Yes. Also reading a lot of books about writing for the first time. So yeah, I'm pretty deep into it. Like at least like a quarter written, but I'm
Okay.
thinking a lot about the characters. They're like living with me,
Great.
stressing me out.
We're excited to see it come to life. Thank you so much.
Thank you.